Dante Moretti married Sofia Bellini the same day he buried his mother. The church was still filled with funeral flowers when the Mafia boss placed a ring on the trembling hand of a woman he barely knew. He did not smile. He did not promise love. He only obeyed the final wish of the dying woman who had built his empire from blood and secrets. But before the priest could finish the blessing, a black envelope was thrown at Sofia's feet. Inside was a photograph of a missing brother, tied to a chair, and written beneath it were 4 words, "Your bride is ours." But why would Dante's enemies want the woman he never planned to love? The church fell silent in a way that did not feel holy. Every man in the room reached for a weapon, but no one fired. Not yet. In the Moretti world, bullets were never the first language. Silence was. A stare could mean death. A pause could mean war. And the moment Sofia Bellini saw her brother's terrified face inside that envelope, she understood that her marriage had not saved anyone. It had only opened the door to something worse. Her knees weakened, but she did not fall. She gripped the edge of the altar, the diamond ring on her finger feeling suddenly heavier than chains. Only minutes ago, she had been a waitress with unpaid rent, a sick brother, and no future beyond survival. Now she was standing beside Dante Moretti, the most feared mafia boss in the city, while his enemies used her brother as a wedding gift. Dante did not touch the photograph at first. He only looked at it. That was what made him terrifying. He did not explode. He did not shout. His face remained still, controlled, almost calm. But the air around him changed. The men closest to him stepped back as if something invisible and deadly had awakened beneath his skin. Sofia looked at him, waiting for something human. Anger, concern, sympathy. Instead, Dante turned his eyes toward her. Cold, dark, suspicious. For a second, she realized a brutal truth. To him, she was not a wife. She was evidence. A stranger forced into his life by his mother's final wish. And now, before the wedding candles had even burned down, his greatest rival had taken her brother and sent a message through her. Dante's uncle, Carlo Moretti, stepped forward first. He was an older man with silver hair, soft hands, and a smile that never reached his eyes. He had spent the entire ceremony watching Sofia like she was dope brought into a royal house. Now his voice slid through the chapel. He said this was exactly why outsiders were dangerous. He said Isabella had been sick, emotional, manipulated. He said the girl had brought the Virelli family straight to their altar. Sofia heard the accusation, but her mind was still trapped inside the photograph. Nico, her little brother, the boy who still slept with a lamp on after hospital nights, the boy who smiled even when pain turned his face gray, the boy she had promised their mother she would protect. She stepped toward Dante before fear could stop her. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she begged him to save Nico. The chapel watched, some with pity, most with contempt. Dante stared at her as if trying to decide whether desperation could be faked so perfectly. Then he picked up the black envelope. On the inside flap was a symbol pressed into wax, a serpent wrapped around a knife. The Virelli mark, a rival family that had been bleeding into Moretti territory for years, buying cops, turning guards, poisoning alliances. Their boss, Luca Virelli, did not attack randomly. He studied people. He waited for weakness. And when he struck, he made sure the wound taught a lesson. This was not only a kidnapping. It was a declaration. Dante folded the photograph and placed it inside his jacket. Sofia felt panic rise in her chest. She reached for him, forgetting who he was, forgetting every gun around them. He caught her wrist before her fingers touched his sleeve. His grip was firm, not cruel, but the warning was clear. Do not forget where you are. Then, in a low voice meant only for her, Dante said that if she had lied to him, her brother would not be the only one who disappeared tonight. The word should have broken her. Instead, something hardened inside her. She pulled her wrist free and looked straight into the eyes of the man she had just married. She told him she had already lost her mother, her home, her dignity, and almost every peaceful day of her life. If he wanted to threaten her, he would have to find something she had left to lose. For the first time, Dante Moretti did not answer immediately. Something in her response disturbed him. Not emotionally, not romantically, not yet, but strategically. Sofia was afraid. Yes, but she was not weak in the way people expected poor women to be weak. She had the exhaustion of someone who had been cornered by life for years and had stopped begging the world to be fair. Dante had seen that look before. In soldiers, in widows, in men second before revenge. He released her wrist. Then he turned to his men and gave 3 orders. Seal the hospital. Find the car that carried Nico. Bring him every person who touched that envelope. The church exploded into motion. Men moved fast, silent, disciplined. Doors opened. Engines started outside. Phones lit up across the pews. Within seconds, the wedding had become an operation. Sofia stood in the middle of it, still wearing white. No one looked at her like a bride anymore. They looked at her like a loaded gun someone had left on the table. Dante walked her out through the side entrance, away from the guests and the watching city. Rain fell hard over the stone steps. Black cars lined the street like a funeral procession that had forgotten where to bury the dead. Sofia expected to be taken to the police. Then she remembered who she had married. The police did not rescue people from Dante Moretti's world. They either served it, feared it, or died pretending they could fight it. The car door opened. Dante gestured for her to get in. She hesitated only once. Behind her, the church bells began to ring, not for marriage, not for mourning, but for something that sounded painfully like warning. The Moretti mansion stood on a hill above the city, hidden behind iron gates and old cypress trees. It was not beautiful in the way Sofia expected wealth to be beautiful. It was too quiet, too controlled, too full of men who stopped speaking when Dante entered. The walls were lined with portraits of dead Morettis. Hard faces, cold eyes, men who looked like they had built their family by burying every person who underestimated them. And now Sofia's portrait would belong to that same house. A maid led her upstairs to a bedroom larger than her entire apartment. There were silk curtains, polished floors, and a balcony overlooking the city. On the bed lay a black dress, not white. Beside it, a note written in Dante's sharp handwriting. Wear this. White makes you visible. Sofia stared at the dress for a long time. That was when the reality settled fully into her bones. This was not a marriage. It was a battlefield, and she had been dressed incorrectly for war. Downstairs, Dante entered his private office, where the inner circle waited. Carlo was there, along with Enzo, Dante's cousin and chief enforcer, and Valeria, the family lawyer who knew every legal secret buried beneath the Moretti name. A map of the city glowed across the wall. The Virelli family controlled the East Docks, 3 nightclubs, and half the illegal arms route near the border. The Morettis controlled the port, construction unions, private security contracts, and the old banking corridors. For years, the 2 families had avoided full war because war was expensive, messy, and bad for business. But Isabella's death had changed the balance. Everyone knew Dante was grieving. Everyone knew grief made even powerful men dangerous or distracted. Luca Virelli had chosen the wedding because he wanted the city to see Dante humiliated in the one place he could not immediately turn into a massacre. Carlo believed the answer was simple. Return the girl. Trade Sofia for Nico. Let the Virellis keep the problem they clearly wanted. Dante said nothing at first. He stood by the window, watching rain blur the lights of the city below. Carlo continued, saying Sofia was not family in any meaningful sense. A signature did not make blood. Isabella had made a sentimental mistake, and the family could still correct it before the mistake cost them soldiers, territory, and reputation. Then Valeria placed a sealed document on Dante's desk. Isabella's final legal condition. If Sofia Bellini Moretti died, disappeared, was divorced, or was handed to an enemy within the first year of marriage, control of several Moretti assets would transfer into an emergency trust. The trust would be managed by an external board loyal not to Dante, not to Carlo, but to Isabella's private instructions. The room went still. Even Carlo stopped smiling. Isabella had not only forced Dante to marry Sofia, she had made Sofia impossible to discard. Dante opened the document and read the final line. Protect her, and you protect the family. Betray her, and you will learn which enemies are already sitting at your table. For the first time that night, Dante understood that his mother had not acted out of emotion. She had known something dangerous, something inside the Moretti house. Upstairs, Sofia changed into the black dress with trembling hands. It fit too perfectly, as if someone had measured her before she ever agreed to the marriage. That thought made her stomach tighten. She searched the room for a phone, but there was none. Only a mirror, a locked door leading into another suite, and a silver-framed photograph on the dresser. Isabella Moretti, younger, stronger, standing beside a woman Sofia recognized instantly. Her mother. Sofia picked up the frame with both hands. Her breath caught. She had seen almost no photographs of her mother from before she got sick. But there she was, standing beside Isabella outside a burned building, both women covered in ash, both looking terrified, both holding the same necklace. Sofia touched her own throat. The necklace was there, hidden beneath the dress. A small gold pendant her mother had given her before dying. Sofia had worn it every day, believing it was nothing more than the last piece of her mother she still owned. Now, looking at the photograph, she realized Isabella had once worn the exact same one. Before she could understand what it meant, the bedroom door opened. Dante stood in the doorway. His gaze moved from Sofia's face to the photograph in her hands, then to the pendant at her throat. Something dark passed through his expression. Not suspicion this time. Recognition. He stepped inside slowly and asked where she got that necklace. Sofia tightened her fingers around it. She said it belonged to her mother. Dante's face became unreadable again, but his silence was sharper now. He crossed the room, took the framed photograph from her hands, and stared at it as if the dead had just accused him. Then his phone rang. He answered without looking away from Sofia. On the other end, one of his men spoke fast. They had traced the car that took Nico. It had not gone to Virelli territory. It had gone to an abandoned Moretti warehouse. A warehouse only Dante's inner circle knew existed. Sofia felt the room tilt beneath her. Dante lowered the phone slowly. The enemy had not entered his house from the outside. Someone inside the Moretti family had taken her brother. And when Dante looked at Sofia again, the coldness in his eyes was no longer aimed only at her. It was aimed at everyone. The abandoned warehouse sat on the south edge of the city, hidden behind rusted gates, dead factories, and a road no ordinary person used after sunset. It had once belonged to the Moretti family during Dante's father's reign, back when money moved in wooden crates and bodies disappeared beneath wet concrete. Officially, the building had been sold years ago. Unofficially, it remained a ghost in the Moretti system, a forgotten place known only to men trusted enough to bury secrets and never speak of them again. That was what made the discovery so dangerous. Nico had not been taken to enemy territory. He had been taken somewhere inside Dante's own history. Dante left the mansion within minutes, but he did not allow Sofia to come. She fought him with the desperate fury of a sister who could not sit behind locked doors while her brother suffered somewhere in the dark. She said Nico would be afraid. She said he needed his medication. She said Dante did not understand what it meant to be all someone had left. Dante listened without emotion. Then he ordered 2 guards to keep her inside the bridal suite. To him, the decision was simple. The warehouse was a trap. Sofia was an unknown variable. Bringing her would only make the enemy's leverage stronger. But for Sofia, it was another kind of betrayal. She had married him because his mother promised protection. She had stepped into his world because Nico's life depended on it. Now the same powerful man who had claimed her in front of a cathedral full of wolves was locking her away while her brother's life slipped through her fingers. The door closed. The key toned. And for the first time since the wedding, Sofia truly understood the horror of being protected by a Mafia king. Protection did not mean freedom. It meant she was valuable enough to be guarded and powerless enough to be ignored. Downstairs, Dante entered the armored convoy without looking back. His face was calm, but every man around him could feel the violence beneath that calm. Enzo sat beside him, checking his weapon in silence. Carlo remained at the mansion, claiming someone needed to protect the family's center while Dante chased a possible trap. It was a reasonable excuse. Too reasonable. Dante trusted very few people. He trusted Carlo even less. The convoy moved through the storm-dark city. Rain struck the windshields like thrown gravel. Streetlights blurred into gold lines across the glass. Dante stayed ahead, his mind moving faster than the cars. The Virellis wanted him to think this was an external attack. The envelope had carried their mark. The message had been theatrical. The timing was perfect. But the warehouse changed everything. Luca Virelli might be cruel, but he was not careless. He would never use a Moretti location unless someone inside the Moretti family gave him access or wanted Dante to discover the betrayal in pieces. And Isabella's letter had warned him. Enemies are already sitting at your table. Dante had dismissed those words as the final paranoia of a dying woman. Now they sounded like prophecy. At the warehouse, the gates were already open. That alone told Dante the trap had been prepared for him. The building stood huge and black against the rain, its broken windows like empty eyes. His men spread out, rifles raised, boots splashing through oil-stained puddles. No one spoke. The city noise felt miles away. Inside, the warehouse smelled of rust, mold, and old blood. A single light swung from the ceiling. Beneath it sat a chair, empty. Rope hung from the arms. A strip of medical tape clung to the floor. Beside it lay Nico's hospital bracelet, cut cleanly through the plastic. Sofia's brother had been there, but he was gone. Enzo cursed it under his breath. Dante crouched, picked up the bracelet, and turned it between his fingers. The plastic was damp, fresh. They had missed him by minutes, maybe less. Then a speaker crackled from somewhere above. A man's voice filled the warehouse, smooth, amused, and poisonous. Luca Virelli. He congratulated Dante on his marriage. He said Isabella had always enjoyed dramatic timing. He said it was touching how quickly Dante had run for a boy he did not know, or because a poor little bride had looked at him with frightened eyes. Dante's men searched for the speaker, but the voice continued, echoing from every corner. Then Luca said something that froze Dante completely. He said Sofia Bellini was never supposed to reach the altar alive. A pause followed. Not long. Just enough to turn every heartbeat in the warehouse into a threat. Then gunfire exploded from the upper windows. The warehouse became chaos. Bullets shredded metal walls. Glass rained down. Men shouted. Muzzle flashes cut through the darkness like lightning trapped indoors. Dante moved with brutal precision, pulling one wounded soldier behind a pillar before firing twice into the shadows above. Enzo led a flank toward the stairwell, killing the lights as he moved. The attack was not designed to kill Dante. It was designed to test his men, to see who ran, who covered, who hesitated, who knew the layout too well. And Dante noticed everything. One of his guards moved before the first shot was fired. Not after, before, as if he had known from which window the bullets would come. Dante fired past him, not at the attackers, but into the guard's leg. The man dropped screaming. The others barely had time to react before Dante was on him. Even in the middle of gunfire, Dante's control was terrifying. He dragged the wounded guard behind cover and pressed his pistol beneath the man's chin. No rage, no questions wasted, only one demand. Who gave them the warehouse? The guard's face folded under fear. He tried to say he knew nothing, but his eyes betrayed him before his mouth did. He looked toward Enzo, not accusing, checking. Dante saw it. So did Enzo. For one sharp second, Cousin and King looked at each other through smoke and gunfire. Enzo's expression did not change, but something in the air between them cracked. Then an explosion tore through the back wall. The blast threw men across the floor and filled the warehouse with dust, flame, and screaming metal. Dante rolled behind a crate, blood running from a cut near his temple. When the smoke cleared enough for him to see, the wounded guard was dead, shot once through the head. Not by Virelli fire, by someone close. The traitor had been silenced. Dante stood slowly. Across the warehouse, Enzo was already helping another man up, his weapon still warm in his hand. There was no proof, only timing. And in the Moretti world, timing could be more damning than evidence. Back at the mansion, Sofia did not wait quietly. She had spent her whole life being underestimated by people who mistook poverty for stupidity. Rich men thought survival made women obedient. Powerful men thought fear made them easy to control. But fear had been Sofia's oldest companion. She knew its shape. She knew how to breathe through it. The locked bridal suite had 3 doors. One led to the hallway, guarded. One led to a bathroom, window too high and narrow. The third led to the adjoining suite, locked from the other side. Sofia remembered the layout from the brief moment Dante had entered earlier. The adjoining suite was his. She did not know why that mattered, only that locked doors in rich houses were rarely locked for the same reason from both sides. She searched the room until she found a thin metal pin inside the clasp of Isabella's old photograph frame. It had not been placed there accidentally. The frame itself was old, its backing loose, its edges worn from being opened many times. Hidden behind the photograph was a folded piece of paper so small she almost missed it. On it, Isabella had written one sentence. When the house turns against you, Follow the mother who lost a child. Sofia read it again and again, feeling the words crawl beneath her skin. The mother who lost a child. She did not understand. Not yet. But Isabella had expected Sofia to be locked in this room. Expected the house to turn. Expected the photograph to be found. That meant the wedding had never been only about a final wish. It had been a move in a war Isabella had been fighting from her deathbed. Sofia used the pin on the adjoining door. Her hands shook, but she forced them steady. After several painful seconds, the lock clicked. Dante's room was darker than haze, colder, stripped of comfort. No family pictures. No soft colors. No signs that a man actually rested there. It looked less like a bedroom and more like a controlled space where sleep was permitted only when necessary. On the far wall hung a portrait of Isabella when she was young. Sofia moved toward it, drawn by the memory of the note. Follow the mother who lost her child. At first, the portrait looked ordinary. Then Sofia noticed a necklace painted at Isabella's throat. The same gold pendant Sofia wore. But beneath the pendant, near Isabella's hand, the artist had painted something strange. A small carved angel. Sofia turned toward the shelves. There were books, files, old boxes, military medals, and one carved wooden angel hidden behind a row of legal volumes. She lifted it. A mechanism clicked inside the wall. The portrait opened. Behind it was a narrow safe. Sofia's breath stopped. The safe was not locked. Inside lay a packet of letters, a flash drive, and a small child hospital identification band. The name on the band was not Dante. It was Dante Moretti. Date of death 24 years ago. Sofia had never heard that name. But the note suddenly made sense in the most chilling way. The mother who lost her child was Isabella. Dante had not been her only son. Sofia reached for the letters, but before she could open them, voices sounded beyond the main door. Two men in the hallway. They were not the guards assigned to watch her. Their voices were low, urgent. One said Dante was at the warehouse. The other said Carlo wanted the girl moved before he returned. The girl. Sofia stepped back from the safe, heart hammering. The door handle turned. She had no time to close the portrait properly. No time to hide everything. She grabbed the flash drive and one folded letter, shoved them inside her dress, and slipped behind the heavy curtains beside the balcony. The men entered. They searched Dante's room first, not Hare's. That terrified her more than anything. They knew there was something to find here. One of them saw the portrait slightly open and swore. He said Carlo would skin them alive if the girl had touched the safe. The other said there was no time, that Virelli's men had already taken the boy to the river house, and the bride needed to be delivered before midnight. Sofia bit the inside of her cheek so hard she tasted blood. Nico was alive. River house. Before midnight. She had a location, but she was trapped in a mansion full of enemies wearing Dante's name. The men moved toward the adjoining door leading to her suite. Sofia waited until their backs turned. Then she slipped out from behind the curtain and ran for the balcony. The drop was impossible. 3 floors down, stone courtyard below, rain making everything slick and deadly. But beside the balcony wall was a drain pipe wrapped in old ivy. Sofia had climbed worse things as a child when landlords locked stairwells and rooftops were the only way to escape summer heat. She lifted the black dress, kicked off her shoes, and climbed over the railing. The rain hit her face like cold needles. Below, a guard turned at the wrong moment. Sofia froze. The guard looked up. For a second, their eyes met. Then he looked away. Deliberately. He had seen her, and he had chosen silence. Sofia climbed down, hands scraping against stone, feet slipping twice before she landed hard behind a row of hedges. Pain shot through her ankle, but she swallowed the cry. She ran barefoot through the garden, past statues and fountains, toward the service wing where delivery trucks entered the estate. Behind her, the mansion alarm began to scream. Dante received the call while standing in the ruined warehouse, surrounded by smoke and bodies. The bride was missing. For half a second, no one moved. Then Carlo's voice came through the phone, sharp with accusation. He said Sofia had escaped, proving she was part of the conspiracy. He said she had stolen something from Dante's room. He said she must be found before she reached Virelli. Dante listened. Then he asked one question. How did she get into my room? Carlo went silent. Not long enough to confess. Long enough to confirm. Dante ended the call. Enzo watched him carefully. He said Sofia running made her look guilty. Dante wiped blood from his temple and looked toward the empty chair where Nico had been held. No, he thought. It made her look desperate. There was a difference. And Dante was beginning to understand that everyone around him wanted him too angry to notice it. Sofia hid in the back of a laundry van leaving the estate. Her ankle throbbed. Her palms were torn. Her hair was soaked against her face. The black dress clung to her like a second skin. Inside her bodice, the stolen flash drive felt hotter than a bullet. She did not know who to trust, so she trusted motion. The van took her past the gates and into the lower city. She climbed out near an old market street where rainwater ran through gutters and neon signs flickered over closed shops. She found a payphone outside a pharmacy, the kind no one used anymore except ghosts and people trying not to be found. She called the hospital first. Nico was not there. The nurse sounded afraid even before Sofia gave her name. She said men had come with transfer papers signed by Moretti doctor. The transfer had been approved from inside the family's private medical fund. Sofia gripped the phone so hard her knuckles whitened. Moretti doctor. Private fund. This betrayal was not one man. It had paperwork. Access. Authority. She remembered the words from Dante's room. River House. Before midnight. She did not know where the River House was, but she knew one person who might. Her mother had once worked for wealthy families before illness took her strength. Sofia remembered childhood stories whispered over cheap soup, names of mansions and roads, and people her mother warned her never to approach. One name returned now like a match struck in darkness. The old ferryman, a man near the Eastern River docks who had carried messages before phones became safer than faces. Sofia reached the docks near midnight. The river smelled of diesel, rain, and rut. Warehouses lined the banks. Some were dead. Some only pretended to be. Men watched from shadows, but none stopped her. A woman barefoot in a black dress walking through Mafia territory looked either insane or protected, and both possibilities made people careful. She found the ferryman in a shack beneath a bridge, old and thin, smoking beside a lantern. When he saw the pendant at her throat, his cigarette nearly fell from his fingers. He did not ask who she was. He said her mother's name. That broke something inside Sofia. For one unbearable second, she was not a Mafia bride or a hunted woman. She was a door to hearing proof that her mother had existed in a world bigger and darker than the one she had known. The ferryman told her the River House belonged to no family officially. It was used for negotiations that were too dirty for hotels and too important for warehouses. Years ago, Isabella Moretti had gone there with Sofia's mother after the death of a child named Matteo. Matteo, the dead son, the hidden brother, the secret in Dante's safe. Sofia pulled out the folded letter she had stolen and opened it beneath the lantern. The paper was old. The handwriting was Isabella's. It spoke of a night 24 years earlier, when a child was taken during a Moretti-Virelli truce. Matteo Moretti, Isabella's younger son, had been kidnapped as leverage against Dante's father. But the exchange went wrong. Gunfire erupted. The house burned. Matteo died before dawn. The official story blamed the Virellis, but Isabella's letter said otherwise. Matteo had been betrayed by someone inside the Moretti family, someone who had given the kidnappers the child's route, his guard schedule, and the location of the safe house. And there had been a witness, Sofia's mother. The ferryman looked at the letter and said the past had finally come to collect its debt. Sofia wanted answers, but there was no time. Nico was at the River House now, trapped inside a repetition of the same nightmare that had killed Dante's brother decades earlier. The ferryman gave her an address and a warning. If she went alone, she would die. Sofia looked toward the Black River. If she did nothing, Nico would die. That was enough. But she was not as alone as she thought. Dante found the payphone first, not because Sofia was careless, but because the city itself bent toward him. Cameras belonged to people who owed him money. Taxi dispatchers had cousins in his kitchens. Street vendors heard things before police did. By the time Sofia reached the docks, Dante already knew she had called the hospital. By the time she left the ferryman, Dante knew about the River House. He could have intercepted her. Instead, he followed at a distance. That choice surprised even him. A day ago, he would have dragged her back by force, locked her in a safer room, questioned her until every secret fell out. But something had shifted. Sofia had escaped his mansion, found a clue his own men had missed, located a witness connected to Isabella, and moved toward danger not for power, not for money, not for revenge, but for love. Dante had built his life around controlled loyalty, paid loyalty, feared loyalty, blood loyalty. Sofia had the kind that could not be bought or ordered, that made her dangerous in a way he did not fully understand. At the river house, the rain stopped. The silence that followed was worse. The building stood on stilts above the water, old and elegant, with long windows glowing yellow against the dark. 2 guards stood at the entrance. More waited near the dock. Sofia watched from behind a collapsed stone wall, trying to count them with a mind racing too fast. Then she saw Nico through the window. He was alive, tied to a chair again, pale but breathing. Beside him stood Carlo Moretti. Sofia's stomach turned cold. Dante's uncle held a glass of wine in one hand and Nico's medical file in the other, as casually as if he were reviewing a business contract. Across from him stood Luca Virelli, smiling like a man who had waited years for the perfect performance. The rival boss and the Moretti uncle were not enemies in that room. They were partners. Sofia understood then that the war outside was theater. The threats, the envelope, the Virelli mark, the warehouse ambush, it had all been designed to push Dante in one direction, to make him suspect the bride, chase the rival, and miss the traitor beside him. Carlo had helped take Nico. Carlo had wanted Sofia traded. Carlo had known about Isabella's safe. And now Sofia knew too much. She backed away, but her injured ankle slipped on wet stone. A small rock dropped into the river. One guard turned. Then another. Sofia ran. She made it only 10 steps before a hand closed over her mouth and dragged her behind the wall. She struggled violently until Dante's voice cut through the darkness beside her ear. He told her not to scream. Sofia froze. Dante released her slowly. For the first time since the wedding, they stood close without an audience. No priest, no family, no guns pointed directly at her. Only darkness, river mist, and a shared enemy glowing behind the windows. Sofia should have hated him in that moment. Part of her did. But when she looked at his face, she saw the blood at his temple, the exhaustion in his eyes, and something else beneath the coldness. Not trust, not love, but belief beginning to form where suspicion had been. She whispered that Carlo was inside. Dante nodded. He already knew. Then she whispered something that made his expression change. Matteo. The name struck him harder than any bullet. Dante had been told never to speak of his younger brother. His father had erased Matteo from the house after the funeral, as if grief was a stain that could be scrubbed from marble. Isabella had kept the memory alive in secret, but Dante, only a child at the time, had learned early that questions about Matteo made adults lie. Now Sofia, a woman he had married hours ago, stood in front of him with his dead brother's name on her lips. She pulled the letter from her dress and placed it in his hand. Dante read by the dim light of his phone. Line by line, the past opened like a wound. His mother had known Carlo was involved in Matteo's death. She had never been able to prove it. Sofia's mother had seen Carlo near the safe house that night, but she had been poor, powerless, easy to silence. Isabella protected her by hiding her identity, then later helped her disappear into the old quarter. But Carlo never stopped searching. Not for Sofia's mother. For the pendant. The pendant contained a tiny internal key, hidden inside the gold, capable of unlocking Isabella's encrypted financial archive. Records, transfers, names, proof of every alliance Carlo had built behind Dante's back. Dante looked at the necklace at Sofia's throat. His mother had not chosen Sofia because of sentiment. She had chosen her because Sofia was a living key to a betrayal buried for 24 years. Before either of them could speak, the river house doors opened. Carlo stepped onto the balcony above the water, holding Nico by the collar. The boy could barely stand. Luca Virelli came beside him, gun in hand, smiling down into the darkness as if he knew exactly where Dante was hiding. Carlo called Dante by name. No surprise, no fear, only satisfaction. He said Isabella should have died before writing letters. He said Sofia's mother should have died in the fire with Matteo. He said the Moretti Empire had always belonged to men willing to do what sentimental women could not. Then he turned the gun toward Nico. Sofia moved before Dante could stop her. She stepped out from behind the wall and into the open, rainwater and mud on her dress, her pendant shining at her throat. Every weapon turned toward her. Dante's hand tightened around his pistol. Carlo smiled. He told Sofia to remove the necklace and walk toward the house, or her brother would join Matteo at the bottom of the river. Sofia looked at Nico, then at Dante, and in that moment, Dante saw the choice forming in her eyes. She was going to sacrifice herself, not because she trusted him, because love had trained her to pay with her own life before letting her brother suffer. Dante felt something inside him move, something old, buried, and furious. He had married her as an obligation, protected her as strategy, suspected her as a threat. But watching her walk toward death with trembling hands and a steady spine, Dante understood the first dangerous truth of his marriage. Sofia Bellini Moretti was not his weakness. She was the one person in the city brave enough to stand where his entire family had failed. And if Carlo touched her, Dante would burn the Moretti empire himself. Sofia took one step toward the river house, then another. Carlo kept a gun on Nico. Luca kept his gun on Sofia. Dante stayed hidden in the dark, calculating distance, bullets, wind, guards, exits, water depth, every possible death in the next 10 seconds. Sofia reached for the clasp of her necklace. Her fingers closed around the pendant. Then the lights of the river house suddenly went out. The entire world dropped into darkness. A gunshot cracked through the night, and Sofia screamed. The gunshot did not echo like a warning. It tore through the dark like a verdict. Sofia screamed Nico's name, but her voice was swallowed by the river wind, the sudden chaos, and the violent thunder of men moving without sight. The lights of the river house had died all at once, plunging the balcony, the dock, and the old wooden rooms into complete blackness. For one unbearable second, no one knew who had fired, who had fallen, or whose blood had just entered the night. Then the emergency lamps flickered red, not bright enough to reveal everything, just enough to turn every face into a demon. Sofia was on the ground near the steps, one hand still gripping the pendant at her throat. She had not been shot. The bullet had struck the railing beside her head, close enough to splinter it across her cheek. Nico was still alive, shaking beneath Carlo's grip. Luca Virelli had moved back into the doorway, his pistol raised, his smile gone. Dante had fired first. Not at Carlo, not at Luca, at the lamp above them. The darkness was not an accident. It was his opening move, and now the river house had become a killing field. Dante stepped from the shadows like the night had created him. His gun was steady. His eyes were no longer cold in the controlled way Sofia had known. They were alive with something far more dangerous, grief that had finally found a target. Carlo saw it too. For the first time, the old man's arrogance cracked. He dragged Nico closer, using the boy's body as a shield. The gesture made something inside Sofia break open. She had seen fear all day, worn it like a second skin, swallowed it until it became part of her breathing. But seeing her sick brother held between two monsters turned fear into rage. She rose slowly. Her bare feet were cut. Her black dress was stained with mud. Blood marked one side of her face where the wooden splinters had torn her skin. She looked nothing like the frightened bride from the church in the mall. She looked like the consequence Isabella Moretti had hidden inside a wedding dress. Carlo ordered Dante to drop the gun. Dante did not move. Luca's men shifted around the balcony, weapons raised, waiting for a command that might turn the entire dock into a graveyard. Enzo had not appeared yet. Dante's soldiers were positioned somewhere in the dark beyond the river house, but none had fired. Everyone understood what was at stake. One wrong move, and Nico would die before the war even began. Carlo smiled again, but now his smile had strain beneath it. He accused Dante of becoming weak. He said Isabella had ruined him even from the grave, forcing him to chase a waitress while his own empire waited to be taken. He said the Moretti family had been built by men who understood sacrifice, not by sons still obeying dead mothers. Dante's answer was silence. That silence frightened Carlo more than shouting would have, because Dante was not deciding whether to kill him. He was deciding how much pain the truth deserved. Sofia looked at Dante and saw the battle inside him. The Mafia boss wanted to shoot. The son wanted answers. The child who had lost a brother wanted to hear the confession with his own ears, not from a letter, not from a dying mother, not from a woman he had met at an altar. Carlo understood that need and used it. He began to speak, not with shame, with pride. He told Dante that Matteo's death had never been supposed to happen. The boy had been leverage, a bargaining chip. Their father had become too sentimental after Isabella's second son was born, too willing to delay decisions, too cautious with alliances. Carlo had wanted control. The Virellis wanted access. So a plan was made. A kidnapping. A control crisis. A reason to weaken Dante's father and force a power restructure inside the family. But Isabella had interfered. Sofia's mother had seen too much. The safe house burned. Men panicked. Orders became bullets. And Matteo, a child who should have been returned alive, died screaming in a room full of smoke. The red emergency lights flickered across Dante's face. Sofia watched him absorb the truth. No dramatic movement. No collapse. No visible wound. But something in him went still in a way that felt worse than rage. Carlo had not only killed his brother. He had built 24 years of loyalty on a grave he helped dig. Dante's entire childhood shifted in that moment. Every forbidden question. Every silence at dinner. Every time his mother touched the locked drawer and looked away. Every time his father punished emotion like it was weakness. Every lesson Dante had learned about power had been shaped by a lie. And Carlo had stood beside him through all of it. An uncle, an advisor, a traitor wearing family blood like armor. Carlo continued, unable to stop now that victory felt close. He said Isabella had suspected him for years but never had enough proof. She had hidden the financial archive, split the key, protected Sofia's mother, then later protected Sofia without telling anyone why. When Sofia's mother died, Carlo believed the key had vanished forever, until Isabella summoned Sofia before her death, until the wedding contract made Sofia untouchable, until the pendant returned to the Moretti house around the bride's throat. Now Carlo wanted the pendant, the archive, and Dante destroyed emotionally before being removed politically. Luca Virelli would receive territory and shipping routes. Carlo would take control of the Moretti Empire through emergency instability. Nico would disappear. Sofia would be blamed. Dante would either die tonight or live long enough to watch every loyal man question his judgment. It was elegant, cruel, almost perfect. Except Carlo had miscalculated one thing. He thought Dante's grief made him weaker. It made him patient. Dante lowered his gun. A ripple moved through the balcony. Luca smiled again. Carlo's shoulders loosened slightly. Sofia's heart dropped, thinking for one terrible second that Dante had surrendered. But Dante was not surrendering. He was choosing the oldest language of his world. A signal. The moment his gun pointed down, the river behind the house erupted. Boats that had been hidden in the black water surged forward without lights. Moretti's soldiers rose from beneath the dock, from behind cargo floats, from the shadowed bank. Suppressed gunfire cut through the night in sharp, brutal bursts. Luca's outer guards fell before they understood where the attack was coming from. The river house exploded into motion. Luca grabbed Sofia by the arm and pulled her toward him, his pistol pressing into her ribs. Carlo shoved Nico toward one of his men and reached for the pendant. Dante moved at the same time, fast enough to make every red-lit shadow blur. A bullet struck the wall beside Carlo. Another shattered the glass behind Luca. Sofia twisted violently, not away from Luca's gun, but into him. It was not graceful. It was not trained. It was desperation sharpened by instinct. She drove her elbow into his throat, hard enough to make him choke, and the gun shifted from her ribs for half a second. Half a second was all Dante needed. He fired once. Luca's weapon flew from his hand, his fingers breaking around the impact. He stumbled back with a scream, and Sofia dropped to the floor as bullets tore through the doorway above her. Nico was dragged inside. Sofia crawled after him, but Carlo caught her by the hair and yanked her back with a cruelty that made Dante's control vanish. For the first time, Dante Moretti shouted. Not an order, not a threat. Her name. Sofia heard it through the gunfire, through pain, through the roar of the river and the screams around them. Dante said her name like it had been torn out of a place he did not allow anyone to touch. And Carlo heard it too. His smile returned, savage and delighted. There it was. The weakness. The bride had become real to him. Carlo wrapped an arm around Sofia's throat and pulled her against his chest. With his other hand, he pressed a knife beneath the chain of a pendant, close enough to cut skin. He told Dante to stop his men or he would open her throat and throw the key into the river with her. Dante raised one hand. The Moretti gunfire stopped almost instantly. That obedience terrified Sofia. So much power, halted by a single gesture. So much violence, waiting for the life of one woman Dante claimed he never wanted. The river house groaned around them. Smoke drifted through shattered windows. Bodies lay across the balcony in stays. Nico's weak voice called Sofia from inside, but he was too far for her to see. Luca Virelli crawled near the doorway, blood on his mouth, still trying to reach his fallen gun. Carlo tightened his grip. He told Dante to look carefully. He said this was what love did to men like them. It made them hesitate. It turned empires into bargaining tables. It made kings kneel for women who should have remained invisible. Sofia could barely breathe, but she heard every word. And she understood the trap now. Carlo did not only want the pendant. He wanted Dante to choose. The empire or the bride. Power or mercy. The same cruel equation that had once killed Matteo. The same old poison dress as strategy. Sofia looked at Dante through the red darkness. His eyes were fixed on her face, searching for a path, an opening, a miracle he could force into existence. She had known him for less than a day, but she could already see how his mind worked. He would sacrifice himself before admitting emotion. He would burn the room before letting Carlo win. He would turn the river red if it meant saving her and Nico. But there were too many guns, too little distance, too much history pressing its knife against her throat. So Sofia made her own choice. She stopped struggling. Her body softened in Carlo's grip, as if fear had finally emptied her strength. Carlo mistook it for surrender. He leaned closer, his attention shifting toward Dante, savoring the power of holding the bride between them. Sofia's hand moved to the pendant, not to remove it, to open it. Her mother had once told her, when Sofia was very young, that if anyone ever tried to steal the necklace, she should press the angel's wing and let it fall. Sofia had thought it was a fairy tale warning, one more strange instruction from a woman who carried too many nightmares. She had never understood it. Now her fingers found a tiny groove shaped like a wing. She pressed. The pendant split open. A small metal shard dropped into Sofia's palm. Sharp, thin, almost weightless. Carlo did not notice until she drove it into his wrist. He screamed. The knife fell from her throat. Dante moved like a released storm. He crossed the space between them with terrifying speed, slammed Carlo into the balcony pillar, and struck him once across the face with enough force to send blood across the red-lit wood. Carlo reached for a hidden gun, but Dante caught his arm and twisted until the joint gave way. The sound was sickening. Carlo collapsed to one knee. Dante stood over him, pistol now pressed to the old man's forehead. Every instinct in the room expected him to shoot. Even Sofia expected it. Carlo expected it most of all. But Dante did not fire. Not because Carlo deserved mercy. Because death would be too simple. Dante looked at the man who had helped kill his brother, betrayed his mother, endangered his wife, and put a sick boy through the same terror that had destroyed Matteo. His face was no longer empty. It was controlled rage, grief, and judgment fused into something merciless. He told Carlo he would not be buried as family. He would be exposed as disease. Then Dante turned his gun and shot Carlo in the shoulder. The old man fell backward, screaming, alive enough to suffer and speak, wounded enough to lose control of the room. That was when Luca Virelli reached the gun. Sofia saw him first. He was half hidden beneath the broken doorway, his face twisted with pain and hatred, his pistol rising toward Dante's back. Sofia shouted. Dante turned, but the angle was wrong. The shot fired. Sofia ran into him. The bullet struck her instead. For a moment, there was no sound, no river, no gunfire, no screaming. Only Dante's arms catching her before she hit the floor. Sofia looked surprised more than hurt, as if her body had not yet explained a wound to her mind. Blood spread across the black dress near her side, darker than fabric, warmer than rain. Dante dropped to his knees with her against him, one hand pressing the wound, the other pulling her close. Luca did not get a second shot. Enzo appeared behind him and fired twice. The Virelli boss fell against the doorway and did not rise. But Dante barely looked. All his world had narrowed to Sofia's face. The woman he had married as a duty. The stranger he had suspected. The bride he had called a weakness without understanding that she would take a bullet meant for him. Sofia tried to speak, but pain stole the words. Dante told her not to move. His voice was low, but it shook in a way none of his men had ever heard. He called for a doctor, for extraction, for every vehicle, every surgeon, every resource he owned. Orders flew from him like bullets, but beneath them was panic sharpened into command. Sofia's fingers gripped his sleeve. She forced one word through shallow breaths. "Nico." Dante looked up. Nico was being carried out by a Moretti soldier, weak but alive. The boy's eyes were fixed on his sister, horror breaking across his young face. Sofia saw him and tried to smile. It broke Dante more than tears would have. Even bleeding in his arms, she was trying to comfort someone else. Carlo laughed from the floor. It was wet, broken, full of pain, but still cruel. He told Dante that Isabella had won after all. She had put a woman in his path, and now that woman would die the way Matteo died, because Dante had not been fast enough. Dante's eyes lifted. Every man in the room felt the temperature change. He handed Sofia carefully to Enzo, who pressed cloth to her wound and shouted for the medics. Then Dante stood. Carlo stopped laughing. Dante walked toward him slowly. No rush now. No explosion. Only the terrible calm that came after a man's last restraint had burned away. Carlo tried to speak, tried to bargain, tried to say he was blood. Dante crouched beside him and said blood had protected Carlo for 24 years. Tonight, it had expired. Then Dante took Carlo's phone from his pocket, unlocked it with his limp hand, and opened the encrypted channel Carlo had used to coordinate with Virelli. Messages appeared. Transfers, names, police contacts, medical approvals, warehouse access codes, orders to move Nico, orders to search Dante's room, orders to take Sofia alive until the pendant was recovered, then dispose of her body in the river. Proof, enough to destroy Carlo in every Mafia court, every corrupt office, every shadow alliance that still respected the old rules. Dante stood and faced the remaining men, Moretti and Virelli alike. He did not need a speech. The evidence moved from phone to phone within seconds, sent to every captain, every banker, every judge on the payroll, every family elder who had doubted Isabella's warning. Carlo Moretti's power began dying before his body did. The old man watched it happen in real time. That was Dante's revenge, not immediate death. Erasure. A king stripped of his throne, his name, his loyalty, his lies. But before Dante could give the final order, Sofia's breathing changed. A medic shouted that they had to move now. Dante turned instantly, leaving Carlo bleeding on the floor as if he had become irrelevant. Sofia was pale, her lips losing color, her hand slipping from Enzo's sleeve. Dante reached her just as her eyes started to close. He lifted her himself. No one dared stop him. He carried her through the shattered river house, past bodies, broken glass, and red emergency light, down the stairs toward the waiting cars. Nico called her name from another stretcher. Sofia's eyes fluttered open once, just enough to find Dante's face above her. The man who had not smiled at their wedding looked ruined now. Not weak, ruined, as if every wall inside him had cracked at once. Sofia whispered something so soft he almost missed it. She told him not to let Nico be alone. Dante bent closer, blood from her wound soaking into his shirt. He told her Nico would never be alone again. Then, after a pause that felt like surrender, he said something no one expected from Dante Moretti. He said he should have protected her sooner. Sofia's fingers brushed weakly against his hand. For a heartbeat, the war paused. Then her eyes closed. Dante shouted her name, but she did not answer. The car doors slammed. Engines roared. Behind them, the river house burned as Moretti men dragged Carlo from a balcony in chains. But Dante did not look back at the traitor. He sat in the back of the armored car with Sofia bleeding in his arms, one hand pressed to her wound, the other holding the broken pendant that had carried 24 years of secrets. The city blurred outside the window. Sirens cried somewhere in the distance. And for the first time in his life, Dante Moretti prayed not for victory, not for revenge, not for power, but for the woman he had married without love to survive long enough for him to prove he had found it too late. But for Sofia, the words never left Dante's mouth. They stayed locked somewhere behind his teeth, trapped beneath years of discipline, pride, and the brutal education of a man raised to believe that wanting anything too deeply made it easier for enemies to take it away. Still, the prayer existed. It lived in the way his hand pressed harder against Sofia's wound. It lived in the way his voice broke every time he ordered the driver to go faster. It lived in the way the most feared man in the city held his unwanted bride like the entire empire had become worthless compared to the rise and fall of her chest. The armored car tore through the sleeping city with two others behind it. One carried Nico, weak but alive, wrapped in blankets and guarded by men who now understood that the boy was no longer a hostage. He was protected blood, not by birth, by command, by the promise Dante had made to a woman who might not live long enough to hear it again. The private Moretti clinic opened before the cars even reached the gates. Surgeons were dragged from their homes. Blood bags were pulled from locked storage. Nurses ran through white corridors as armed men cleared every floor. No police were called. No public hospital was trusted. No official report would describe what had happened at the River House. But inside the clinic, no one could hide the truth from Dante. Sofia was dying. The bullet had entered her side and missed her heart, but the bleeding was heavy. Too heavy. Her pulse kept slipping under the doctor's fingers. Her skin had turned cold beneath Dante's hand. Once, her eyes opened halfway, unfocused, searching through the bright ceiling lights as if she were already somewhere between the living and the dead. Dante walked beside the stretcher until the operating room doors stopped him. For the first time in years, someone told him no. The surgeon placed a hand against Dante's chest and said he could not enter. Every guard in the corridor froze. No one touched Dante Moretti. No one gave him orders. But Dante did not strike the doctor. He did not threaten him. He only looked down at the blood covering his own hands and stepped back. The doors closed, and Sofia disappeared behind them. The silence that followed was worse than gunfire. Dante stood in the corridor under white fluorescent lights, still wearing his wedding suit, now soaked in blood that did not belong to his enemies. It belonged to his wife, his false bride, his mother's final wish, the woman he had suspected, locked away, threatened, and failed to understand until she had thrown herself in front of a bullet meant for him. Behind him, Nico was brought in on another stretcher. The boy was pale and exhausted, but conscious. His wrists were bruised from rope. His breathing was shallow from fear and sickness. When he saw Dante, his eyes filled with a terror he tried to hide and failed. Dante turned toward him. For one moment, Nico looked like Matteo, not in the face, in the helplessness, in the way a child could be turned into a weapon by men who called themselves powerful. Something inside Dante closed around that old memory and crushed it until only resolve remained. He approached Nico slowly, carefully, as if the boy were a frightened animal that had every right to bite. Nico asked where Sofia was. His voice cracked on her name. Dante could have lied. He had lied to stronger men for less important reasons. Instead, he told him the truth. She was in surgery. She was badly hurt. But the best doctors in the city were fighting for her, and no one would touch Nico again while Dante lived. The boy stared at him, trying to decide whether monsters could make promises and mean them. Then Nico asked whether Sofia had been hurt because of him. Dante felt the question land like a knife. He could have said no. He could have said it was Carlo's fault, Luca's fault, the family's fault, the past's fault. All of that would have been true, but not complete. So Dante sat beside Nico's bed, still covered in Sofia's blood, and said the wound was not Nico's burden to carry. Sofia had spent her life protecting him because she loved him. Now Dante would protect both of them because he had failed to do it soon enough. Nico did not answer. He only turned his face away and cried silently into the pillow. Dante remained there. He did not know how to comfort a child. He had been raised by men who punished tears and women who hid them. But he stayed anyway, because leaving felt like another betrayal, and Dante was finished betraying the people Isabella had placed in his path. Hours passed. Outside the clinic, the city began to wake. Inside the Mafia world, the night had not ended. The evidence from Carlo's phone had spread faster than blood through water. Captains who had quietly leaned toward Carlo suddenly discovered loyalty. Bankers who had protected his hidden accounts began sending passwords. Judges who had accepted his money denied knowing his name. Police officers who had followed his instructions started deleting messages too late. Carlo Moretti was alive when they dragged him into the old family basement beneath the mansion. That was deliberate. Dante had ordered it before the surgery doors closed. Not execution. Not yet. A living traitor was more useful than a dead one, and Dante had learned from his mother that the cruelest revenge was not always blood. Sometimes it was truth delivered to every person who once believed a lie. Carlo was strapped to a chair in the chamber where Moretti elders had settled disputes for generations. His shoulder was bandaged badly enough to keep him conscious and painfully enough to remind him that mercy had not entered the room. Around him stood men who had served the Moretti family for decades. Some had loved Isabella. Some had feared Dante's father. Some had followed Carlo because he seemed practical, stable, useful. Now they watched the evidence play across the screens. The messages, the transfers, the orders, the warehouse access codes, the medical authorization for Nico's illegal transfer, the agreement with Luca Virelli, the old payments connected to the night Matteo died. Then came the archive. Sofia's pendant contained the key. The flash drive taken from Dante's room contained the second half. When Valeria combined them, Isabella's final weapon opened. It was not only a record of Carlo's betrayal. It was a map of rot. For 24 years, Isabella had collected fragments. Bank ledgers hidden beneath charity accounts. Photographs from forgotten security cameras. Letters from dead drivers. Testimony from frightened servants. Names of men who were paid to look away the night Matteo was kidnapped. Names of doctors who falsified reports. Names of Virelli intermediaries who carried Carlo's money. At the center of it all was one recording. Old, damaged, but clear enough. Sofia's mother, Elena Bellini, speaking in a trembling voice to Isabella after the fire. She had seen Carlo. She had seen him near the safe house before the attack. She had seen him hand a document to a Virelli man. She had heard Matteo crying. Then smoke had swallowed the room. The recording ended with Isabella's voice, not regal, not commanding, but broken. She promised Elena that one day Carlo would answer for it. She promised to protect her. She promised to protect any child Elena ever had. That child had become Sofia. The room of Mafia elders sat in silence after the recording ended. Carlo tried to speak. No one listened. For 24 years, he had survived because suspicion without proof was politics. Proof was judgment. And Isabella, dying slowly upstairs while men whispered about her weakness, had prepared a trial more devastating than any bullet Dante could have fired. Valeria asked the elders to vote, not on guilt, that was already dead, on name, whether Carlo Moretti would remain recognized as family. One by one, the elders removed their rings and placed them on the table. In the old Moretti tradition, removing a ring in judgment meant severance. It meant the family name no longer shielded the condemned. His debts became personal. His allies became exposed. His enemies became free. By sunrise, Carlo Moretti no longer existed inside the family records. His businesses were seized. His men were arrested, bought, or buried. His offshore accounts were emptied. His houses were taken. His loyal captain swore directly to Dante or disappeared before noon. No funeral would ever carry his name. No portrait would ever hang in the mansion. No priest would speak over his grave. Carlo did not die that morning. Dante made sure of it. He was handed over to the one prison outside the country where money could buy silence but not comfort, where men with no flag and no mercy kept people who were too valuable to kill and too dangerous to release. Carlo would live with every betrayal known, every power stripped away, every name erased from the family he had tried to steal. When the plane carrying him left the private runway, Dante did not watch. He was still at the clinic. Sofia had not woken up. The first day passed. Then the second. The doctor said the bullet had been removed. The bleeding had stopped. Her body was fighting. But trauma, blood loss, exhaustion, shock, all of it had pushed her deep into unconsciousness. They spoke in careful phrases, the way doctors do when hope exists but refuses to make promises. Dante hated careful phrases. He wanted numbers, certainty, enemy names, things he could control. But Sofia's body did not obey him. No amount of money could command her eyes to open. No soldier could threaten death into reversing itself. No empire could bargain with the quiet machine beside her bed. So Dante sat there, hour after hour, in a chair too small for a man used to thrones, beside a woman who had entered his life as an obligation and now held his entire world hostage without moving a finger. The first night, Enzo came to him. He stood outside the hospital room with his hands folded, waiting like a soldier expecting judgment. Dante stepped into the corridor, and for a long moment they said nothing. The warehouse still stood between them. The guard who had looked toward Enzo before dying. The timing, the suspicion. Enzo did not defend himself immediately. That made Dante listen. He admitted he had known the guard was dirty before the wedding. Isabella had suspected him and quietly asked Enzo to watch him. Enzo had not told Dante because Isabella had ordered secrecy until she confirmed whether the corruption led to Carlo. At the warehouse, the guard had looked toward him because he recognized that Enzo knew. Before Enzo could take him alive, someone else had silenced the man. That someone, the new evidence showed, had been one of Carlo's shooters hidden in the smoke. Dante studied his cousin carefully. Trust was not repaired in one conversation. In their world, loyalty had to survive suspicion, and suspicion did not apologize quickly. But Enzo had killed Luca. He had saved Sofia from a second shot. He had carried Nico out when the house burned. And the archive contained messages proving Carlo had tried to frame Enzo as a backup traitor if the first plan failed. Dante finally spoke. He told Enzo that secrets kept for dead queens still had consequences. Enzo lowered his head and accepted it. From that night on, Enzo remained loyal, but never comfortable. That was how Dante preferred loyalty now, not blind, not flattering, not built on family blood alone. He had seen what blind family loyalty could bury. On the third night, Nico entered Sofia's room in a wheelchair. His fever had broken. His wrists were bandaged. His face still looked too young for everything he had seen. Dante stood to leave, thinking the boy deserved time alone with his sister, but Nico stopped him. He said Sofia would want him there. Dante did not know what to do with that sentence. So he stayed. Nico talked to Sofia as if she could hear him. He told her he was taking his medicine. He told her the nurses were nice but too strict. He told her Dante scared everyone at the clinic, including the coffee machine, because whenever it stopped working, 3 men ran to fix it. Dante did not smile, but something almost reached his eyes. Then Nico's voice softened. He apologized to Sofia for being the reason she had agreed to the marriage. He said he knew she had done it for him. He said she always did everything for him. He promised that when she woke up, he would become strong enough that she would not have to keep sacrificing her life to save his. Dante turned away. That was a cruelty of love. He realized. It made even children feel guilty for surviving. He stepped to the window and looked down at the city his family controlled. From up there, the streets looked peaceful. Cars moved. Lights blinked. People bought bread, crossed roads, opened shops, argued over small prices, lived ordinary lives without knowing how many wars were fought beneath their feet. Dante had spent years believing control was protection. He controlled routes, money, weapons, men, judges, fear. But he had not protected Matteo. He had not protected Isabella from dying with secrets in her chest. He had not protected Sofia until she had already been forced to bleed. Power without truth was just a larger cage. On the 4th morning, Sofia moved her fingers. Dante saw it first. The movement was so small the nurse almost missed it. But Dante had spent 4 days watching her hand like it was the last visible part of his soul. He stood instantly, chair scraping against the floor. Sofia's eyelids fluttered. Her lips parted. The machines changed rhythm. Nico woke from where he had fallen asleep in the chair and whispered her name. Sofia opened her eyes. Not fully at first. Just enough to see blurred light, white ceiling, and the shape of a man standing above her like he had not slept since the world ended. Dante leaned closer, but stopped himself from touching her too quickly. He said her name. This time, not shouted through gunfire, not torn from panic, spoken like a confession. Sofia looked at him for a long, fragile moment. Then her eyes shifted to Nico. The boy burst into tears. Dante helped him closer, careful with the wires and tubes. Sofia's hand found Nico's hair with weak, trembling fingers. She could barely move, barely speak, but the relief in her face made the room feel warmer than any prayer. Her first clear word was his name. Nico laughed and cried at the same time. Dante stood back, giving them space, but Sofia's gaze returned to him before he could leave. She remembered the river house, the bullet, his arms around her, his voice promising Nico would never be alone. She tried to speak, but pain stopped her. Dante poured water into a small cup and held the straw near her lips with a gentleness so unnatural to him that even Nico stared. Sofia drank a little. Then she asked if Carlo was dead. Dante answered honestly, no. Her expression changed, not into fear, but into something sharper. Dante understood before she said anything. She did not want revenge that disappeared into darkness. She did not want a secret punishment whispered through Mafia corridors. She wanted Carlo exposed. She wanted Isabella vindicated. She wanted her mother's truth to mean something beyond blood. Dante told her Carlo had lost everything. His name, his power, his allies, his future. Then he told her the archive had cleared Elena Bellini's testimony, revealed the truth about Matteo, and broken Carlo's network across the city. The Virelli family had fractured after Luca's death. Half their captains fled. The other half negotiated surrender. Their East dock routes were seized before sunrise. Their corrupt officials were exposed. Their money was frozen. Their men began turning on each other the moment they realized Carlo's protection had vanished. Sofia listened quietly. There was satisfaction in her eyes, but not joy. Justice did not return dead mothers. It did not erase hospital rooms. It did not make a forced marriage gentle. It only stopped the wound from being denied. Dante knew there was something else he needed to say, something more difficult than any order he had ever given. He sent Nico to rest, promising him he could return soon. The boy resisted until Sofia nodded weakly. Enzo wheeled him out, leaving Dante and Sofia alone in the soft mechanical quiet of the room. For a while, neither spoke. Sunlight entered through the curtains and touched the edge of Sofia's face. She looked pale, exhausted, fragile in body but not in spirit. Dante realized he had never truly looked at her without suspicion standing between them. Now he saw the small scar near her eyebrow, the calluses on her fingers from years of work, the exhaustion beneath her eyes that had been there long before the wedding, the strength that did not announce itself with power, but revealed itself through endurance. He had known queens raised in luxury who would have shattered under 1 hour of Sofia's life. Sofia looked at him and asked what happened to the marriage. Dante understood the real question. Was she still trapped? Was the contract still a cage? Was she alive only to continue being useful to his family? He reached into his jacket and placed a document beside her bed. Valeria had prepared it that morning. A release. If Sofia chose to annul the marriage after recovery, Nico's medical care would remain fully funded. Her protection would remain active. The apartment above the bakery would be restored or replaced. Isabella's trust would recognize Sofia as beneficiary regardless of whether she stayed Dante's wife. No punishment, no condition, no debt. Sofia stared at the paper. For the first time since waking, her composure cracked. She turned her face away, and Dante saw tears gather silently at the corners of her eyes. He did not know whether they came from relief, exhaustion, pain, or the shock of finally being given a choice after everyone had spent days making choices around her. Dante spoke before fear could turn him silent again. He said his mother had forced a marriage, but he would not force her to remain in it. He said Sofia had entered his house as a stranger and still protected his blood, his truth, and his life more fiercely than people who had carried his name for decades. He said if she wanted freedom, he would give it. If she wanted distance, he would enforce it. If she wanted him to disappear from her life after Nico was safe, he would obey that too. The word obey felt strange in his mouth. Sofia heard it. Her eyes returned to him, searching his face as if she could not decide whether this was another strategy. Dante did not blame her. Trust could not be demanded like territory. He continued, voice lower now. He told her he had mistaken control for protection. He had mistaken suspicion for intelligence. He had mistaken coldness for strength. And because of that, he had nearly lost the only person brave enough to bring his mother's truth into the light. Sofia watched him carefully. Then she asked the one question that mattered. If Isabella had not forced him, would he have ever chosen her? Dante did not answer quickly. A lie would have been easier. A romantic lie. A beautiful lie. The kind that wounded people wanted to hear when pain had made them tired. But Sofia deserved better than beauty. She deserved truth. Dante said no. The word landed between them with brutal honesty. Sofia's expression tightened, but she did not look surprised. Then Dante continued. He said he would not have chosen her because he would never have looked towards someone like her. Not because she lacked worth, but because he had trained himself to see worth only in power, bloodlines, alliances, and danger. He had been blind in the most expensive way a man could be blind. He looked at her then, no defense left. He said his mother had not forced him to love Sofia. She had only forced him close enough to see her. The room went still. Sofia closed her eyes. For a moment, Dante thought he had said too much too soon, or too little too late. Then she opened them again and told him love was not repayment for a bullet. Dante nodded. She told him protection was not ownership. He nodded again. She told him if she stayed, it would not be because of fear, money, Nico's treatment, Isabella's wishes, or the Moretti name. Dante said it would be her choice. Sofia studied him for a long time. Then, weakly, she pushed the release document back toward him. Not far, just enough to make him understand. She said she was not signing anything while drugged, wounded, and angry. For the first time in days, Dante almost smiled. Almost. It was not forgiveness. It was not romance wrapped neatly after violence. It was a beginning of something more difficult. A choice postponed until it could be made freely. And for Dante Moretti, a man who had taken cities with less patience than that, waiting became his first act of love. Weeks passed. Sofia healed slowly. The bullet wound became a scar across her side, a permanent mark of a night the city would never publicly remember, but the Mafia world would never forget. Nico recovered in the Moretti clinic, then began treatment under specialist Dante brought from abroad. He gained weight. Color returned to his face. He learned to walk through the mansion gardens without flinching at every footstep. At first, Sofia hated the mansion. Every hallway reminded her of being watched. Every locked door felt like a threat. Every servant lowered their eyes too quickly. But Dante changed things quietly, not with speeches, but with actions. The bridal suite was no longer locked. The guards outside her door were removed and replaced only with distant security she approved. Her old apartment was restored and kept available. Nico's room was placed beside Hayes, not in a separate wing. The Moretti staff were instructed to answer Sofia directly, not through Dante. When one captain referred to her as the obligation, Dante dismissed him from the inner circle before dessert was served. When another man called her the waitress bride under his breath, Sofia answered before Dante could. She said being a waitress had taught her more about men than being rich had taught him about respect. The room went silent. Dante looked at the captain and told him she had just given him more mercy than he deserved. From that day on, no one used the phrase again. Sofia did not become a Mafia queen overnight. She did not start ordering executions or wearing diamonds like armor. That was not her power. Her power was quieter and more unsettling. She remembered names, servants, drivers, widows, children of dead soldiers, families who had been treated like costs on a balance sheet. She asked where money went after men died for the family. She asked why medical fund depended on loyalty instead of need. She asked why Isabella's charities had been reduced after her illness. At first, Dante thought these were soft questions. Then he saw what softness revealed. Carlo's corruption had thrived in places no feared captain bothered to inspect. Hospital invoices, widow payments, school accounts, funeral funds, quiet corners where suffering had been too ordinary to look suspicious. Sofia found patterns because she understood survival from below. Dante knew empires from the throne. Sofia knew them from the floor. Together, they saw the whole room. A month after the wedding, Dante held a private memorial for Matteo. Not the cold family ceremony from 24 years ago. Not the buried, shame-filled ritual his father had controlled. A real memorial. Isabella's portrait was placed beside a small photograph of Matteo recovered from her archive. Sofia brought the photograph of her mother standing with Isabella outside the burned building. Nico placed white roses beneath it. Enzo stood at the back, head bowed. Valeria read Isabella's final letter aloud. In it, Isabella wrote that grief had taught her the difference between blood and family. Blood could inherit a name. Family protected the truth when lies became convenient. She wrote that Sofia's mother had risked everything to speak for a dead child who was not her own. She wrote that Sofia carried that same courage, though she might not know it yet. She wrote that Dante would resist a marriage, resent it, misunderstand it, and perhaps even hate her for it at first. Sofia glanced at Dante. He did not look away. The letter's final lines were addressed to him. Isabella told her son that love would not make him less powerful. It would make him responsible for what his power touched. She told him that if he became only feared, he would die surrounded by obedience and no one who truly mourned him. But if he learned to protect without possessing, and to trust without controlling, he might become greater than the men who built the Moretti name from blood. Dante stood silent as Valeria folded the letter. Then he stepped forward and placed his mother's ring beside Matteo's photograph. No one understood at first. Then he spoke. He said the old Moretti Empire had ended at the river house. The family would still survive. It would still defend itself. It would still answer violence when violence came. But the internal rut Carlo had protected would be cut out completely. No more hidden kidnappings disguised as strategy. No more children used as leverage. No more widows abandoned after loyalty was spent. No more family names shielding betrayal. Some men in the room shifted uncomfortably. Dante noticed. He wanted them uncomfortable. Transformation in a criminal empire did not arrive like redemption in a church. It arrived like new law enforced by a man everyone knew could still be merciless. Dante had not become gentle. He had become precise about what deserved brutality. And for the first time, Sofia saw the difference. After the memorial, she found Dante in Isabella's rose garden. The garden had been neglected during Isabella's illness. Weeds had climbed the stone path. Several bushes had died. The white roses near the fountain were still blooming, stubborn and pale against the dark soil. Dante stood near them with his hands in his pockets. Sofia approached slowly, still healing, one hand resting lightly over the scar beneath her dress. She told him his mother would have liked the memorial. Dante said his mother would have criticized the flowers. Sofia laughed softly before she could stop herself. The sound startled both of them. It was the first real laugh between them. Small, brief, fragile, but alive. Dante looked at her like the sound had changed the garden. Sofia looked away first, not because she was afraid, but because some feelings were more dangerous than bullets when they arrived before trust had finished healing. Dante told her Valeria had finalized the release document. She could sign whenever she wanted. Sofia nodded. Then she said she had read it. Dante waited. She said it was very generous. He said generosity had nothing to do with it. It was what she was owed. Sofia looked at the roses. For days, she had asked herself what freedom meant now. Leaving would be easy in one way and impossible in another. Her old life no longer existed untouched. The apartment, the diner, the hospital bills, the quiet desperation, all of it belonged to a woman who had walked into a church thinking she was selling herself to save her brother. But staying could not mean surrender. She had made that clear. Dante had not argued. That mattered. Not enough to erase everything, but enough to begin. She told him she would not sign the annulment yet. Dante's face changed so slightly most people would have missed it. Sofia did not. She had become fluent in his silences. She said she was not promising forever. She was not forgiving every wound in one dramatic moment. She was not suddenly comfortable being married to a mafia boss whose enemies still watched from every shadow. Dante accepted all of it. Then Sofia said she wanted time. Time to know the man without the altar, the contract, the gunfire, and the blood. Time to decide whether Dante Moretti was capable of being a husband instead of a jailer. Time to see whether love, if it came, would come freely. Dante looked at her with a restraint that no longer felt cold. It felt careful. He said he could give her time. Sofia looked back at him and said time was not given like a gift by powerful men. It was respected. Dante lowered his eyes for a moment. Then he nodded. Respected. Then, and because he did not touch her, did not claim her, did not step closer until she chose to remain, Sofia felt something loosen in her chest that fear had held tight since the wedding. 3 months later, the city spoke of Dante Moretti differently. Not softer, never softer, but differently. The Virelli family had been absorbed, exiled, or dismantled. Luca's remaining allies learned that attacking Sofia or Nico was the fastest way to disappear from every map. Carlo's name became a curse whispered only by fools and men already doomed. The corrupt medical network he had used was replaced by a fund Isabella had designed before her death, now expanded under Sofia's supervision. People began calling Sofia the Black Bride of the Moretti house. Some said it with fear, some with admiration, some with resentment. Sofia ignored all of them. She spent mornings with Nico, afternoons reviewing charity accounts with Valeria, and evenings walking the mansion grounds where the locked gates no longer felt quite as much like prison bars. She still had nightmares. So did Nico. Sometimes thunder sent her back to the river house. Sometimes the smell of roses made her remember the wedding dress and the blood on its hem. Healing did not move in straight lines. Neither did love. Dante never rushed her. That was what finally changed everything. A man who had spent his life taking what he wanted learned to wait outside doors. He learned to ask before entering rooms. He learned that silence could comfort when it was chosen, not imposed. He learned Nico's medication schedule. He learned Sofia liked coffee too bitter for anyone else. He learned she hated white roses at first, then slowly stopped hating them when new ones bloomed in a garden no longer ruled by secrets. And Sofia learned Dante too. She learned that he did not sleep before checking every security report himself. She learned that his left hand tightened whenever Matteo's name was mentioned, but he no longer forbade it. She learned that he visited Isabella's room every Sunday and stood there for exactly 7 minutes, as if grief still had an appointment. She learned that beneath his cold control lived a man who had been trained out of tenderness so young he barely recognized it when it returned. One night, Sofia found him in the chapel where they had married. The blood had long been cleaned, the funeral flowers removed, the candles replaced, but memory remained in the stone, stubborn and invisible. Dante stood at the altar, looking at the place where the black envelope had fallen. Sofia walked down the aisle slowly. This time, no one forced her. No guests watched. No guns shifted. No priest trembled. Only the quiet chapel, the distant rain, and the two people who had started as strangers inside a dying woman's final plan. Dante turned when he heard her. He did not speak first. Sofia stopped beside him and looked at the altar. She said she hated him that day. Dante said she had every right. She said she was afraid he would destroy her life. He said he almost did. She said she thought Isabella had cursed her. Dante looked toward his mother's memorial candle. Then Sofia said maybe Isabella had saved them both. The words settled between them. Not dramatic, not easy, true in a way that still hurt. Sofia reached into her coat and took out the release document. Dante's body went still. He had known this moment would come. He had prepared himself for it in the only way he knew how, by making sure every door out of his life was open for her. The car, the money, the apartment, Nico's care, protection at a distance, a clean name, a free future. Sofia held the document for a long moment. Then she tore it in half. Dante did not move. Sofia tore it again. And again! The pieces fell across the altar like white ash. She turned to him, eyes shining but steady. She said she was not staying because of Isabella, not because of Nico, not because of Faye, not because of debt, not because of the Moretti name. She stepped closer, close enough that Dante could see the faint scar near her cheek from the river house railing. She said she was staying because for the first time in her life, the choice was his. Dante's breath changed. It was almost nothing. But Sofia heard it. He asked if she was certain. There was no demand in his voice, no victory, no possession, only the vulnerability of a man who had more power than mercy had ever allowed him to need, and yet in front of her, he had learned to stand without armor. Sofia took his hand, not as a hostage, not as a sacrifice, as a wife. She said love did not begin at their wedding. It began the first time he chose not to own her. Dante closed his eyes briefly, as if the words had reached somewhere deeper than he could defend. Then he touched his forehead to hers. No audience saw the moment. No empire recorded it. No enemy understood that the most dangerous transformation of Dante Moretti had not happened when he destroyed Carlo or defeated Virelli. It happened when he learned that love was not another territory to conquer. It was the one place he had to enter unarmed. Years later, people still argued about the Moretti marriage. Some said Isabella had planned everything perfectly. Some said Sofia had saved Dante. Some said Dante had turned Sofia into a queen. But those who knew the truth understood it was never that simple. Isabella had opened the door. Blood had revealed the enemies. Betrayal had burned the old empire down. But Sofia had walked into the darkness for love, and Dante had followed her out of it a changed man. On the anniversary of their wedding, Dante and Sofia returned to the chapel alone. This time, she wore no white dress. No blood stained the floor. No black envelope waited at the altar. Nico stood outside in the garden, healthy, taller, laughing with Enzo about something that would have once seemed impossible. Isabella's roses bloomed along the path, bright beneath the evening light. Dante placed a new ring in Sofia's palm, not because the first one was invalid, because the first had been a command. This one was a question. Sofia looked at him, and the cold Mafia king who once married her only to fulfill his mother's dying wish waited for her answer like his entire life depended on her freedom. She smiled, and this time, when Sofia Bellini Moretti said yes, no one forced her, no one threatened her, and no one held a gun behind the promise. The city still feared Dante Moretti. His enemies still whispered his name like a warning. But inside the house on the hill, where secrets had once lived behind portraits and mothers had died carrying impossible truths, love finally became the one thing no rival family could steal. Because Dante had married Sofia for his mother's final wish. But he spent the rest of his life proving that loving her was his own.